I work as a policy advisor for Food and Water Europe, dealing with things like fracking and gas extraction in general. And Food and Water Europe is an environmental NGO based in Brussels. But our mother NGO, Food and Water Watch, they are based in Washington. So they are working with US communities that are already impacted by fracking or the construction of pipelines that are transporting the hydrocarbons. Simon has mentioned it. It's not about the well itself, the fracking itself. You have to keep in mind that it's about the whole infrastructure. And Food and Water Europe is doing the same in Europe. And since we were already in touch with activists in England and Scotland, and they were already in touch with activists in America, we found out that there is an already existing, we call it a transatlantic plastics pipeline, meaning that Ineos is now already importing US fracked hydrocarbons in order to produce plastics and petrochemicals, mainly at Grangemouth in Scotland, but also at Roughness in Norway. So we've started looking into this and published our first issue brief on Ineos. And while doing the research, we thought that this is a very intriguing company with a very intriguing owner, billionaire Jim Ratcliffe. And so we've digged deeper, and I brought two other issue briefs with me. The one deals with their corporate profile, because we wanted to know who is Ineos and where are they around the world. And the last issue brief that we've published deals with their environmental record. And it's a very bad one throughout all their petrochemical facilities in Europe. The reason why we've done that is because Ineos tries to downplay the risk of fracking in the United Kingdom. So it's important to know, apart from fracking itself, with whom we are dealing and if they are capable of doing a clean business already. It would be nice if I would have something to show, to share. Oh, it's there. Okay, I miss you quite. Yeah. Okay, so who's Ineos and what do they want? Before I'll start talking about Ineos, I want to highlight two further things. One is a global one, an overarching one. The other one is a local, regional one. Simon has already mentioned both, but it's really important that you keep this in mind and you do not forget about this. I'll start with the regional one. So you have to keep in mind it's not about one seismic survey, it's not about one well. It's about the development over a time period of 30 to 40 years in your area, meaning that bit by bit, your area will be industrialized. No matter what you think of fracking or not, no matter if you think that, well, might not be, this is something that the industry has to do. They will have to develop an area because otherwise they are not capable of extracting the hydrocarbons in a way that is economically viable for them. So keep this in mind. If you say yes to the first step, it's incredibly hard to define then a moment in time when you have to say no, enough is enough. The second thing is climate change and global warming. We live in a fossil fuel-based driven world. That's a fact. Projector, laptop, everything. But whether or not we like it, whether or not we are aware of, we need to very soon shift to a complete different energy model. Because in 2016, we've already reached the 1.1 degree, and Simon has already said that we have to stay somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees, because this is the potential of global warming that we can somehow deal with. No scientist on Earth can tell you what will happen if we will, in actual fact, go over the tipping point of 2%. Some scientists, although prepare their students already, that they have to face a world that will be 4 to 6 degrees warmer, simply because of a fact that we are not moving fast enough. Now, gas has been touted as the perfect bridge fuel towards that post-fossil future. But in actual fact, is the biggest problem at the moment. Simon has mentioned the number of 34 times more potent than CO2, but this is on a 100-year scale. If you look on a 20-year scale, it's 84 to 87 times more potential than CO2, meaning that we can't go on changing one fossil fuel for the other, especially because of the methane leakages that are well known to the industry. But because these are profit-oriented companies, they have to be. This is the nature of a private company. Because of that, they're not tackling methane emissions. And they're also trying to expand the existing gas infrastructure, although gas demand is dropping in the European Union as a whole, but also in the United Kingdom. And Simon has also mentioned that, and I personally share his view, you have huge potential for energy efficiency measures. So while a fracking industry will need 10 to 30 years to develop, this is exactly the timeline that we have to get off fossil fuels. And you see it here. If we, I hope, no, sorry. Anyhow, so if you only tackle CO2, if we only tackle CO2, we won't be able to stay within 1.5 to 2 degrees. Only if we tackle CH4, which is methane, which is gas, and CO2, we will be able to stay somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees. The next slide gives you, this is from a very good website, I think. Just Google Climate Central and sea level rising, and then just type in your village. I don't know if you can read this. This is Leeds, just to give you an indication. Sorry, here is Pickering. So in both cases, 2-degree warming to 4-degree warming, you will be safe, but down south, a lot of the coastal areas will be underwater. Now, back to Ineos. So it's very important to hear themselves speaking about what they're planning to do with their gas, and they're pretty clear about it. While you have a national debate about whether or not shale development shall take place, linked to energy, to the argument of energy supply, Ineos is quite clear in stating that gas is their lifeblood, and they need the cheap gas to get their business going. So just keep in mind, this has nothing to do with the heating of your homes or the electricity in your homes. If the company finds something and if it will develop the field, if it will extract the hydrocarbons, it will either use ethane, which is the wet gas component, as a direct feedstock for plastics and petrochemicals, or use the methane for their own energy reasons. Now back to the question, who is Ineos? And I'm very, very thankful to my US colleagues that they were capable of transforming all the data that we found out about Ineos into a graph, which gives you a quite complex complexity with a company named Ineos Limited at the core of it all. Limited means, of course, limited liability. They're based on the Isle of Man, which is a tax haven. And the orange pieces that you see around the core are their businesses in Switzerland, also because of tax reasons. So around the core of Ineos Limited, you have companies sitting in Switzerland, and around them you have holdings and finance investment limiteds. So nothing that has to do with upstream business, and in actual fact, Ineos has never drilled or fracked a well. If, which I think won't happen, but if they want to do this, they will have to rely most likely on their US partners, and we'll learn more about this later. So who owns Ineos? Simon has already mentioned the name Jim Ratcliffe. I think you know him. So he is basically Ineos. Understanding Jim Ratcliffe, which is not quite easy, gives you also perspective on Ineos. And the next slide that we will have will show you the growth of Ineos, the development of Ineos over the time span of 20 years, because it's important to understand their philosophy, the way they go about their daily business, because the way they did it and do it in their petrochemical sector is the way they will do it in the oil and gas sector, and we already see this. So the other two guys that are part of Ineos, the one is the director of Ineos, Andrew Carey, with round about 20%, and finance director John Rees, also 19%. So this is Ineos developing from 1998 to 2017. It all starts with the acquisition of a petrochemical plant at Antwerp in Belgium for £91 million. And just 1 year later, they strike a deal for £505 million, and they bought off ICI Acrylis. 6 years later, a 5.1 billion deal takeover of a company named Innovine, which required a loan of £4.9 billion. The reason why we're here has to do with this deal, because within that package, they've also bought the Grangemouth facility. And through the Grangemouth facility and the need to import fracked hydrocarbons, Ineos develops more and more to a company that wants to explore the oil and gas themselves. We'll skip over through all the other acquisitions and go directly to the year 2008. Financial crash, and now Ineos is struggling. They're really in trouble. Grangemouth is at about 50% of their productivity. And by mid-2009, the debt hovered already at 6.7 billion. They have to pay almost 700 million in fees annually to the banks. This is the period when the idea comes that they will build special vessels, they call them dragon ships, and they will import then the fracked hydrocarbons from the United States because it's a cheap source for their other products. In 2010, they're moving the headquarters to Switzerland. In parts, they're back, but not really. Jim Ratcliffe tried to say that they're back with their headquarters in the United Kingdom, but this is not the whole truth. As you've seen in the structure, the core remains, the core company is still based on the Isle of Man, and very important parts of Ineos are still based in Switzerland, but he as a private person has moved back to the United Kingdom. In 2013, they've also received a loan of £230 million to build the biggest ethane storage tank. Because there's one thing to transport the hydrocarbons from the United States to Scotland and Norway, but they also want to make sure that they have enough in storage just in case that something goes wrong with the supply chain. And I'll talk about this a bit later. Battle for Grangemouth happens in the same time. So Battle for Grangemouth is a title that was chosen by Ineos and Jim Ratcliffe. He produced a documentary where he pretty much shows off how he beat the unions at Grangemouth, forcing them to agree to lower wages and pensions. While at the same time he's traveling the seas in his 100 million pound yacht. From there onwards, we see that Ineos is developing more and more to a company that wants to become also an upstream producer, meaning that they want to have dominance, power, and the overview not only over the end of the production cycle, but also of the beginning. So in 2015, they're buying for almost 500 million pounds 12 very important North Sea oil and gas fields that are capable of heating 1/10 of UK's homes. In 2016, we see the first ships arriving from the United States. And then last year, we see some very important next steps. So first, they bought for £1 billion all the upstream business of a Danish company named Dong, because they now prefer to invest in renewables. They've also bought all the shale licenses of a French company named Engie, owned by the French state, which makes them now the biggest wannabe fracker in the UK. And they've also bought for, I would say, lousy £200 million, the Forties pipeline system. And this is real crucial key gas infrastructure in the United Kingdom. It feeds Grangemouth, but it's also a very important benchmark, a hub for crude oil. And the story is not over. Last year, they've also announced that they will invest further £1.6 billion into the expansion of their petrochemical facilities, in particular at Antwerp, where they want to build now the biggest butane storage tank, which will allow them to transport the hydrocarbons into mainland Europe, most probably to their biggest petrochemical facility at Cologne. So this is their development. This is their growth. And with their growth, depth follows. This gives you an overview of their manufacturing sites in Europe, and the table shows you some of the chemicals they're dealing with, because we thought it is important, again, I repeat myself, it is important to know how they deal now already with these toxic substances. So a lot of them are extremely flammable or explosive, and almost a majority of them have some negative impacts on human health. Now, what about their environmental record? Let's hear again from Jim Ratcliffe himself. So the first one, you had the first one, occasional punctures. The second one is extremely important for you as a community. In 2015, during a talk at the London Business School, he speaks about the symbiotic relationship that is very important because, and then he goes on saying, occasionally things go wrong and we need their sort of sympathy from time to time. So your sympathy, meaning what? This company will start monopolizing your economy once they're in, because they will have to stay for 30 to 40 years, because the nature of their business model is monopolizing. This will mean that you will have to go into this symbiotic relationship with Ineos, and in case that something goes wrong, because your whole economy will rely on Ineos, you'll have to somehow accept that things go wrong. Very important to keep in mind. Now, the last one is really hilarious. He buys all kinds of stuff. So he bought Bell stuff. He bought Swiss football club Lausanne. He bought, I think it's a farm in Tanzania, but he also bought a vast estate in Iceland, making him the biggest landowner in Iceland. And he was interviewed and asked what his plans are. Basically saying he has no plans. He wants to keep it as it is. And then he said, man has damaged a lot of the environment around the world in one way or the other. And there is a sort of uniqueness about places which are untouched by humans. And I think that inherently there will be a value, because people like to go to places where the landscape is untouched. I think we all agree. But let's see what occasional punctures really mean. So I've called the next 3 slides occasional punctures, part 1 to 3. We will not go into detail. I will share the slides afterwards. You have all the information and the issue briefs that I brought with me. Please take them all with you. I've carried them from Germany via train, ferry, bus, train. So please take them with you. This is the last opportunity. It's my last night. But it's important to know that there will be accidents. And we are seeing this at all their petrochemical plants. Something goes wrong. But what he calls a puncture might be a major catastrophe for you. So we had fires, explosions, leakages. We have workers that have been hospitalized, environmental damage, and so on and so forth throughout Europe at all their petrochemical facilities, as well as in the United States. They also have petrochemical plants in India and Thailand. We wanted to look into that, but we weren't able to really get the details. But it's quite striking that although we all know that we have the best regulation in the world and in Europe and the United Kingdom, apparently Ineos is not capable of somehow dealing with the risks. They will also be fined quite some times for environmental health and workplace safety violations in the United States as well as in the United Kingdom. This is an overview of the fines and costs of their partners, because again, if they will start drilling, which I think they won't, because you will stop them, you will all stop them. But if, it's good to know how their partners work. And one of their main partners, Sunoco, owned by Energy Transfer Partners, these are the ones behind the North Dakota pipeline, Energy Transfer Partners. So they've been, recently, last week, they've been fined $12.6 million for constant violations during the construction of the so-called Mariner East 2 pipeline, which brings us directly to fracking and plastic. So this is a graph of what I've already explained. This is the transatlantic plastics, what we call the transatlantic plastics pipeline. So the hydrocarbons, they're being fracked in Pennsylvania, transported via an already existing pipeline, the Mariner East 1 pipeline, to the Marcus Hook facility. And then Ineos docks with their ships and then transport them to Scotland and Norway. Maybe soon enough, I hope not, but maybe when the plant at Antwerp is ready, also to Antwerp. What they nonetheless need to do, because they've signed a 15-year contract with their US partners and also with the Danish shipbuilding company, they will need to build a second pipeline. This is the Mariner East 2 pipeline, in order to fulfill the obligations under the 15-year contract. Now, all along this pipeline, communities like your community are standing up opposing the construction of this project, simply because of the fact that ethane is highly explosive and the pipeline is being built very, very near to homes and also schools. So people basically fear for their health and also the health of their children. And I am in touch with them. I'm also trying to build bit by bit transatlantic network that aims at tackling those multinationals, in particular Ineos and their US partners on both sides of the Atlantic. And people from Pennsylvania, groups from Pennsylvania were really interested in this tour, and they've asked if these events are being live streamed. They would have liked to watch, and they've asked me to reach out to you and to say that they'll be keen to get in touch with you, because I think it's very important to bring people together to learn from their experiences, the impacts they're facing now already, but also for you to share your experiences, because this makes us all together stronger. And only if we really have this big transnational network, we are able to confront these multinational companies. Now back to Ineos. This is a graph that shows you all the licenses of Ineos in the United Kingdom. The blue ones are 100% owned by Ineos, and the striped ones are the ones where Ineos has an interest. For example, the one of iGas at Ellesmere, an application that was rejected by the Cheshire Council, as was the one at Harthill and also Bramley Moor Lane, which is a bit closer to you. So this gives you an overview of Ineos's pedals in the United Kingdom. Here in the north are the still existing pedals in Scotland. So although Scotland has now an indefinite moratorium, is it? Because they have to use planning powers at the moment. They don't have the powers. They need to be transferred from Westminster first to have a proper fracking ban. So Ineos is still the owner of the licenses, and they're also challenging now the Scottish fracking ban, which also shows you a lot of the way they are trying to force fracking and their business upon people. And you have lots of examples here in England as well. The way they're bullying the National Trust, the court injunction, the way they've misled the public about the Sherwood Forest, and just goes on and on and on. On the left-hand side, this is more an extract of your area. The blue ones, again, 100% Ineos, and the orange ones is the ones where Ineos has an interest. Now, thanks to Simon, he raised 2 days ago a question. So I did a bit more of a research. You've seen already the very complex structure of Ineos, with Ineos Limited at the core. They've recently restructured their business simply because they have now all these oil and gas businesses going. But up until now, I didn't really do the research looking at who is the actual owner of the pedals. And the actual owner, legally speaking, of the pedals is a company named Ineos Upstream Limited. And this is an extract from the annual report, the most recent one that is online. And now let's look at the results and dividends. So they had a loss before taxation in 2016 of £12 million. In 2015, their loss was £11 million. There were no employees with contracts of employment in the name of the company during the whole year of 2015. And concerning financial risk management, they're saying that the company has in place a risk management program that seeks to limit the adverse effects on the financial performance of the company where appropriate. So this is so you have basically, the owner of your pedal is basically a company that exists only on paper, and it gives you there has no liability whatsoever if they don't think that it is appropriate. 2 final points I want to make. So back to Pennsylvania and back to what we've said now a few times, because it's very important to repeat it, especially when you speak with your political decision makers, your local ones, but also the national ones. This gives you an overview of what shale development means. So all the dots you see are drilled oil and wells. And the next one is a GIF, shows you the development during a decade in Pennsylvania. Now just watch and... They're still looking, they're searching. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4 wells. Now it gets interesting. They found something. All right, there's a business, there's a market. And now they develop.
Are these wells or well pads?
Wells. Well pads. Well pads. There we are. This is development. Last point. very important. This brings us back to Ineos, fracking and plastics. We have a big problem with plastics. And before we started looking into Ineos, I personally was not aware of this link. But it's very important to raise this issue. That's why I will end the presentation on plastics. In 2017, a study revealed that 73% of your shorelines are already littered with plastics, mainly in the form of pellets, so-called nurdles. They've been found all along the Firth of Forth, which brings us directly to Grangemouth, and 50% of endangered puffins in this area contain plastics in their stomachs. We had studies in 2013, 15, and 17 showing that sea salt is already contaminated by plastic. In 2017, a study was published showing that plastic fibers have been found in tap water all around the world. And last year, scientists caught plankton on camera eating plastic, meaning it has entered the food chain. And I personally think, no matter if it's fracking, Ineos or plastic, we've reached now a stage where we must clearly say enough is enough, and we have to stop it. Thank you.